Welcome back to Zero to Hero. Today we're doing another comprehensive match analysis. This time we'll be looking at Joe Ugarte versus Andrew Zheng in the finals of the 2025 Louisville Regional Championship. This also took place in Regulation H. This is a very interesting set with two very different players and two very different teams. This set can teach us a lot. First, we'll break down each of their teams, then consider the matchup, and analyze each of the three games turn by turn. If you haven't yet and you're enjoying this type of content, make sure to subscribe. Let's consider Joe's team first. Garchomp, Jumpluff, Torkoal, Dragonite, Kingambit, and Hisuian Typhlosion. What's the game plan of this team? This is a typical Joe Ugarte hyper-offense team, revolving around using Torkoal to keep the sun active and dishing out huge damage with Typhlosion. We can't talk about this team without pointing out the Eject Pack Torkoal. The Eject Pack is a held item that forces the user to switch out when any of its stats are lowered. Torkoal can lower its own special attack by using Overheat to switch out right after, or if Torkoal gets intimidated, it will also trigger the switch. This is beneficial since it can allow Torkoal to come in and set the sun, then switch out to set the sun again later. This also allows Joe to switch to another offensive threat while the sun is still active. On this team, Jumpluff and Typhlosion benefit from the sun. Jumpluff has Chlorophyll, which doubles its speed in the sun, allowing it to set fast tailwinds or disrupt opponents with Encore and Sleep Powder. Typhlosion is equipped with a Choice Specs item, along with an offensive Terra type in Fire. His main move on this Pokemon is the incredibly powerful Eruption. With this loadout, Typhlosion is able to easily pick up 2 knockouts on a single turn while the sun is up. In addition to this heavy damage output, Torkoal has access to Helping Hand to further accentuate this damage. Aside from his Sun Core, he can still keep up the offense, while providing good defensive synergy with his other 3 team members. Garchomp with a Life Orb hits very hard. It can sit next to Jumpluff or Dragonite to click Earthquake without worrying about damaging its ally. Kingambit also has Terra Flying, which allows it to turn its fighting weakness into a resistance, and is another option for Garchomp to click Earthquake next to. Dragonite has the Lumberry, mainly to prevent any burns or sleep status. It's also running Terra Normal Extreme Speed, although it doesn't have an offensive item or inner focus, so it is vulnerable to Intimidate. It can be used to secure late game knockouts, after the opponent has been softened up by the rest of Joe's offense. These 3 physical attackers, while 2 of them are weak to Intimidate in Garchomp and Dragonite, Kingambit has Defiant, which will get a boost if intimidated, providing great offensive synergy with the 3 of them, as if the opponent tries to intimidate the 2 dragons, Kingambit will be around to be a thorn in their side. These Dragon, Flying, and Steel types are able to switch in on each other's weaknesses quite well, to reposition and dish out solid damage in the process. If you watched our last match analysis, this may look similar to Marco Silva's team, with the Eject Pack Torkoal and a Sun mode, not to mention the Jumpluff. Joe, however, has been using this specific tech piece for much longer. Joe had actually used this specific Torkoal and Jumpluff way back in June 2023 at NAIC, where he placed 4th. He also used it at Hartford 2023, landing 25th, and he used it to win the Portland 2023 Regionals. Looking back at his prior team, he also used an Assault Vest Kingambit, and as mentioned, the same Jumpluff set. It's safe to say that this is a team and playstyle that is a comfort pick for Joe. Let's look at Andrew's team next. Amoonguss, Incineroar, Sneasler, Garchomp, Porygon 2, and Gholdengo. Andrew's main win con is setting up with Gholdengo to sweep games with powerful Make It Rains, as we've seen him do this multiple times throughout the tournament. But this team is still considered a balanced team. It has many supportive options with Amoonguss, Incineroar, and Porygon 2. As mentioned, his main goal is to set up Nasty Plot with Gholdengo, allowing it to dish out big damage while surviving attacks with its strong bulk, defensive Terra type, and supportive teammates. Amoonguss with Rage Powder is a great ally to Gholdengo, being able to redirect attacks away from it. Porygon 2 is able to provide a form of speed control for Gholdengo by using Trick Room against faster teams or reversing it against opposing Trick Room teams. Incineroar is the most standard set here, but its options in Fake Out and Parting Shot can really lock down opponents, allowing Gholdengo to set up. Alternatively to the Gholdengo win condition, Andrew also has a strong combo with Sneasler and Garchomp. Sneasler has a very unique set, including Coaching and Terra Flying. This can use Coaching on Garchomp to raise its attack, while terastallizing to Flying, thus allowing Garchomp to click Earthquake without again worrying about damaging its ally. Dire Claw also provides great offensive synergy, allowing it to threaten any fairy or grass types that could give Garchomp trouble otherwise. Overall, this is an incredibly flexible team that can adapt to many different teams and playstyles. It also has a great spread of speed tiers, allowing him to speed sandwich opponents and use just Trick Room as enough speed control against a variety of matchups. It seems Andrew's thought process in team building was to use the strongest Pokemon in the meta, while creating some unique synergies to pull the team together, as the top 6 Pokemon in Day 2 of this tournament are the exact same 6 Pokemon on Andrew's team. So what's the matchup like? Joe's team has a clear goal: set the sun and dish out huge damage. Andrew's team has no way to overwrite the sun, so one of Joe's goals will be easy to accomplish. Joe has pretty solid speed control with Tailwind and Chlorophyll on Jumpluff, but Andrew has an overall faster team, with Sneasler being the fastest Pokemon in the matchup, as well as Garchomp outspeeding Joe's main piece Typhlosion, as well as his Dragonite and Kingambit. Andrew's main piece in Goldengo, however, looks to have a rough time here. It underspeeds and is weak to Garchomp and Typhlosion, while Kingambit and Torkoal can both hit it super effectively as well. Particularly Kingambit's Sucker Punch will give Goldengo a lot of trouble since it can move before it with a priority attack. His method of protecting Goldengo with Amoonguss is also not great, since both are weak to Eruption, and Amoonguss doesn't have a Terra type that will allow it to resist fire. In the sun, with Terra Fire, Choice Specs, and a potential helping hand from Torkoal, Typhlosion can easily plow through resists like Terra Water Goldengo and Garchomp, while possibly one-shotting even Incineroar depending on how it's trained. Andrew will need to weather the storm of Joe's offense, while leaving his main win con of Goldengo behind. Alternatively, he'll need to use enough disruption or speed controls of his own to gain speed control on his side. Incineroar will be a key piece in this either way, with Fake Out, fire resistance, and safety goggles to avoid any sleep powders. Damage from Andrew's Garchomp, as well as support from Sneasler and Porygon 2, will likely be his game plan. Joe, on the other hand, wants to press his offense as he always does. Securing the sun is easy enough with Torkoal. Typhlosion is his main win con and has a great matchup as mentioned, so he'll want to maintain speed control with Jumpluff here. For his last Pokemon, Garchomp or Kingambit could both easily be brought. Garchomp threatens Andrew's Garchomp, Sneasler, Incineroar, and Goldengo, while Kingambit heavily dissuades Andrew's Goldengo and his Incineroar. Let's see how the set plays out. Heading into Game 1, Joe does indeed lead Torkoal to get the sun right away, along with Jumpluff, who can threaten sleep powders. Andrew leads Sneasler and Porygon 2, who gets a special attack download boost. Sneasler immediately threatens an Oko onto Jumpluff with Dire Claw, while Porygon 2 threatens both targets with an Ice Beam or potentially a Terra Blast Ground. Trick Room, however, seems to be the more threatening option from Andrew, as Joe wants to bring in his damage, which will be faster with Tailwind up. Joe needs Jumpluff to stick around to support his win con, so he commits his Terra Dark onto it to survive a potential Dire Claw or Ice Beam, while clicking Sleep Powder into Porygon 2. He also locks Overheat into Sneasler to trigger an Eject Pack switch and bring it down to its Focus Sash. While Joe Terras his Jumpluff and lands his Sleep Powder, Andrew does the unthinkable. He committed Close Combat into Jumpluff, predicting the Dark Terastallization, taking it down in one hit. Porygon 2 takes the Sleep turn, while Overheat again brings Sneasler down to its Focus Sash. Torkoal switches out into Typhlosion, while Joe switches Torkoal back into Jumpluff's slot at the end of the turn. This turn 1 was an insane play to say the least. Andrew making a read like this was an incredibly risky play. If he got that read wrong, Jumpluff would have eaten the attack, only to follow up next turn with a Tailwind, setting up the incoming Typhlosion to sweep the whole game. However, Andrew came to make the decision, and it paid off big time. Removing Jumpluff turn 1 removes Joe's access to any form of speed control. Andrew, with a likely Incineroar and Garchomp in the back, can pin down Joe's slower offensive threats. After this Jumpluff knockout, and Torkoal's Eject Pack being spent, Andrew is firmly in the lead here, despite the sleeping Porygon 2. Turn 2, we see Joe deliberate between Eruption and Overheat into Porygon 2. The reasoning for clicking Overheat instead of Eruption would likely be if Typhlosion takes damage, its Eruption damage would be significantly reduced, where Overheat will hit hard either way. But he makes the correct call of locking in Eruption. Sneasler can only hit Typhlosion with Dire Claw, which is a resisted hit. Eruption, even at 60 to 70% power, with a helping hand from Torkoal and the Sun and a Choice Specs, might still be enough to knock out Porygon 2. And if it isn't, it will be enough to two-shot it for sure. While Porygon 2 will likely continue to sleep another turn if he can't get the KO this turn, and locking into a spread move will also finish off the Sneasler. Andrew decides not to try to chip Typhlosion, and commits Close Combat onto Torkoal, getting a Poison Touch proc in the meantime. Eruption, as expected with the helping hand, one-shots Porygon 2 and finishes off Sneasler. As expected, Andrew brings in Incineroar and Garchomp, which is now the fastest Pokemon in the match, since we see Joe brought Kingambit in the back. This turn may have seemed to be heavily in Joe's favor, getting a double knockout and removing Andrew's speed control in Porygon 2. But the overall speed control is still in Andrew's favor since he is the faster Pokemon. Typhlosion's Eruption with a helping hand here could set up Zhou to win the game, despite both opponents resisting it. But again, the issue is all three of Zhou's Pokemon are slower than Garchomp, while it can outspeed them and hit them super effectively with ground attacks. Zhou goes for an Overheat on Torkoal and Eruption on Typhlosion. Andrew is almost certainly going for a Stomping Tantrum into Typhlosion, since it cannot protect, and it is slower. We see the Stomping Tantrum remove Typhlosion before it can attack. While Incineroar gets in some damage onto Torkoal with a knockoff, Garchomp pretty handily eats the Overheat from Torkoal with about 70% HP left. While Kingambit comes in, Torkoal takes more poison damage, meaning it will faint the next turn. With the game firmly in Andrew's favor at this point, Zhou goes for a Helping Hand Sucker Punch into Garchomp, which just barely doesn't get the knockout. A Stomping Tantrum and a Sun-boosted Flare Blitz, along with Poison Chip, nets Andrew the win in Game 1. So what did we learn from Game 1? Right out the gate, we learned that Andrew is prepared and willing to take huge risks to get ahead in this set. We also solidified that Zhou's Jumpluff is one of the most important Pokemon on his team, giving him access to the desperately needed speed control, hence why he committed his Terra to try to keep it alive. Porygon 2 on Andrew's team is equally important. While not getting in a single attack, it actually exerted incredible pressure. Zhou committed an early Sleep Powder rather than a Tailwind to prevent a Trick Room from going up. If Zhou loses Jumpluff, or if Andrew can keep Porygon 2 alive, Andrew can maintain speed control to win the game. Andrew also played perfectly after his hard read turn 1, guaranteeing his win with perfectly accurate moves and making great use of the turn order. We can really see the benefit of Andrew's great speed spread with having slow Pokemon, middling speed Pokemon, and fast Pokemon, being able to take great advantage of his opponents being either all fast or all slow. Both players recognize these and change their leads up going into Game 2. Zhou leads Typhlosion and Torkoal, while Andrew leads Porygon 2 and Incineroar. Torkoal sets the Sun, then is switched out thanks to Intimidate, while Kingambit comes in. This Incineroar lead may seem inconsequential, but forcing out Torkoal here means Zhou can't use Helping Hand Eruption. If Zhou wants to remove Porygon 2, he will need to commit his Terra Fire, or double into it. Terastallizing will remove his Ghost typing, which will remove his Dark weakness to Knockoff, but it will also leave him vulnerable to Fake Out. Now, locking in Fake Out into a Ghost type would be an insane play to say the least. But both us, the audience, and Zhou both know Andrew is not adverse to making an insane play just as he did last game. The question is, does he do it again? Zhou decides not to Terra, locking in Eruption and Low Kick onto Incineroar rather than Porygon 2. Since Porygon 2 is likely to use Trick Room to give Incineroar the speed advantage, by Zhou removing the Incineroar, even if it means Typhlosion goes down to a knockoff, will guarantee that Kingambit will move first in Trick Room. Andrew, being a game up and clearly not adverse to insane reads, goes for the Fake Out in a Typhlosion, which whiffs since Zhou didn't Terastallize, and Zhou's attacks connect and remove the Incineroar. Porygon 2 then gets its Trick Room up. Andrew brought Sneasler in the back, which will now be moving last. With a weakened Porygon 2, speed control in Zhou's favor, and a Sneasler that can't hit Typhlosion effectively, Andrew has pretty much lost this position and the game, so much so that he concedes the match on turn 2. What did we learn from Game 2? What I love about both Games 1 and 2 is that they are an excellent example at showcasing what risky plays can do. Game 1, Andrew took a huge lead with his risky play, while Game 2, he lost right on turn 1. Game 2 is the reason players do not take these types of risks very often. Perhaps Andrew figured he was up a game, and if he can win right then and there with another off-the-wall play, it would be an easy victory. And if the risk doesn't pay off, he can still win in Game 3. Many players share this sentiment, that taking risks when up a game in a set can throw the opponent off guard and secure an early victory. Whereas if you're on the back foot, you likely want to play safer as you need to hold on to the win for a chance at moving forward. Some players, however, have the opposite mindset, thinking that you should play safer when ahead to secure a victory, and you should play riskier when behind to try and get back in a game. Some people may also find fault at Andrew for conceding this early in Game 2. You could make the argument that he still had a chance. Sneasler can KO Kingambit with a close combat, Porygon 2 can recover up, and possibly use Terra Ground to dish out solid damage in Trick Room. But the reality is that this match would be such an uphill battle for Andrew at this point, it's almost not worth playing. Andrew clearly thought the same way, as he opted to just move on to Game 3. If you find yourself in a lost position like this early in a match, there is one thing you can do. You can use the time you have to plan for the next game, which is what most players actually do. But if you find yourself in Andrew's situation, where you're confident you can win the next game, and you already have a game plan for it, I don't think conceding a hopeless situation is a bad thing. It can help you refresh and just move into the next game, as dwelling on your mistakes too much can cause tilt and set you back. Moving into Game 3, we see Joe leads the same way he did Game 1, with Jumpluff and Torkoal, while Andrew leads Porygon 2 and Incineroar again, the same way he did Game 2. It's interesting that both players led the leads in the game that they had already lost. The sun goes up while Torkoal ejects out into Typhlosion. Joe needs to prevent Trick Room from going up, or position around it. Andrew, on the other hand, wants to secure that he can get it up. Now that everything is on the line in this Game 3, both players decide not to take any big risks, with this potential fake out into a Ghost-type shenanigan. Joe swaps out Jumpluff into Torkoal, and after some deliberation, decides not to Terra Typhlosion and just hit a flat eruption for solid damage. Andrew knows that he needs Jumpluff removed, so he opts for Trick Room and Flare Blitz into Jumpluff's slot. Porygon 2 gets hit by a Sleep Powder, Flare Blitz will remove the Jumpluff, again giving Andrew the advantage with the faster threats in the back. If P2 doesn't get put to sleep, Incineroar will still get off damage and Trick Room will go up, making Jumpluff much worse off as it'll be the fastest thing in the match. With Trick Room up, Torkoal will now be moving first, and it can threaten a KO on Porygon 2 with Overheat. Joe likely wants to pick up one-shots here to force in Andrew's faster Pokemon, allowing Joe to clean up with a slower Typhlosion or Kingambit in the back. Opting for maximum damage, he also locks in Terra Fire this turn with an Eruption on Typhlosion. Even if he takes damage from Incineroar, as a knockoff is likely, he will be able to switch moves after losing the choice specs, letting him continue to press damage with Heat Wave or Shadow Balls. Andrew is in a tight spot, and is likely going to let Porygon 2 go down, while chunking Typhlosion with a knockoff. He could go for Parting Shot into the Typhlosion, to cycle Incineroar in, and then fake out the next turn if Joe Terras this turn, and then knock it off later. An Overheat connects, and removes Porygon 2. Knockoff hits the Terra'd Typhlosion, which survives at around 40%. Typhlosion hits back with a weakened Eruption, which Incineroar handily survives. In a surprising turn of events, we see Amoonguss come in from Andrew's side. Bringing this Pokemon significantly strengthens Andrew's team in Trick Room due to its low speed, and the fact that none of Joe's offensive threats are immune to Spore. Depending on how Torkoal and Amoonguss are each trained, it's possible that Amoonguss is slower. Considering Joe is running an offensive fast team with Tailwind, it's possible his Torkoal is not minimum speed. Since we see Joe deliberate on his moves for a bit, knowing Trick Room access is off the table, if he can stall out the Trick Room and preserve Typhlosion, he can come in for a late game Tailwind to allow Typhlosion to sweep. But he decides to go for damage, and locks in Overheat into Incineroar, while Typhlosion clicks Heat Wave. Andrew, on the other hand, is not scared for his Amoonguss, despite it facing down 2 fire types in the sun. He knows how Amoonguss is trained, while Joe might not. Andrew knows that despite Amoonguss' Spore pressure, Incineroar is his key to winning this fight. None of Joe's Pokemon can really deal much damage to it, thanks to its Fire, Dark, Ghost, and Grass resists, as well as its safety goggles. 2 of Joe's Pokemon are also weak to a Flare Blitz. The play Andrew makes here is crucial, as he identifies and pivots to Incineroar being his win condition. Revealing that his Amoonguss is in fact slower than Joe's Torkoal, it moves first, with a Pollen Puff into Incineroar, healing it up significantly. With Torkoal at -2 from its last Overheat, it lands into Incineroar only dealing around 10%. Incineroar stays on the field and finishes off Typhlosion with a Flare Blitz, before it can attack and remove Amoonguss. Despite the recoil, Incineroar stays above 50% HP. Joe's in a tough spot, and his only remaining source of damage is Kingambit. It does have Low Kick, which can deal solid damage to Incineroar, but he has no way around a potential Rage Powder from Amoonguss. Kingambit also has an Assault Vest, meaning he can't protect to stall Trick Room turns here. Joe makes a read that Amoonguss will not use Rage Powder, and he commits 2 attacks into Incineroar, knowing that if it's not removed, he has no chance at the game. He locks in Overheat and Sucker Punch. This was a very risky read, as if Amoonguss did click Rage Powder, Sucker Punch would have done nothing, and Kingambit would have gone down to a Flare Blitz. But there is a chance that the Overheat Sucker Punch can take out Incineroar before it attacks. Low Kick would have been nice, but since Incineroar is slower here, if he wants to attack Incineroar with Kingambit, Sucker Punch is his only option. Andrew, on the other hand, knows that a Flare Blitz here will guarantee a knockout into that slot, either if Kingambit stays in or switches to Jumpluff. Andrew decides to Spore the Kingambit. This sequence of moves ensures that both Incineroar and Kingambit go down, thanks to the Flare Blitz recoil damage, and both attacks landing on Incineroar. This may seem like a misplay from Andrew, as we just mentioned how Incineroar is his win con. You could make the argument that a Pollen Puff into Incineroar would have been a much better play, and that the Spore was wasted since Kingambit got to attack still and was KO'd immediately after. It may seem that way, but consider these points from Andrew's perspective. 1. If he did not Spore the Kingambit, it could have gotten off a Low Kick, which would deal significant damage to Incineroar. 2. Even if he does Pollen Puff, Incineroar might still go down, due to the double up attack and recoil damage being so high from Flare Blitz since Kingambit was at full HP. 3. He still has an incredibly safe game plan with his last Pokemon that he can use after Incineroar goes down, getting in a free switch. Andrew here is playing a turn ahead and covering multiple options. Trick Room only has 2 turns left. If Incineroar takes a KO, Andrew has a free switch into his likely Garchomp in the back. It can underspeed Jumpluff and hit it for good damage, then outspeed Torkoal even with a Tailwind after Trick Room expires. We see Jumpluff come in for Joe, and sure enough the Garchomp for Andrew. Garchomp also resists fire attacks, and does not have to worry about strong neutral hits from Kingambit. It is however vulnerable to Sleep Powder and neutral to Grass. Andrew's best play is to Terrasilize Garchomp here to resist all of Joe's damage, giving it a Grass resistance. It is still vulnerable to Sleep Powder, but Amoonguss is immune to it and can continually heal up Garchomp with Pollen Puff if needed. Terrasilizing Amoonguss could be good to remove its fire weakness, but that would leave it vulnerable to a Sleep Powder. And Joe really has no offense left here to speak of. Torkoal is at -6 and has only a few overheats left, while Jumpluff's only attacking move is resisted by both opponents and will reduce its own special attack as well. Joe could protect Torkoal here to avoid Amoonguss Spore until Trick Room ends, but then it would be left vulnerable to Garchomp. He decides to Sleep Powder Garchomp and attack with Torkoal. Andrew, on the other hand, makes the most out of Trick Room and spores Torkoal, preventing it from attacking, while hitting Jumpluff with a Dragon Claw, which does more than 50% before the Sleep Powder connects. Trick Room ends on this turn, and both players have a sleeping Pokemon. Speed order will hardly change with a Tailwind from Joe, so there's not much point in using it. The game is locked in for Andrew at this point. It's only a matter of time here for Garchomp to wake up, KO the Jumpluff, then finish off Torkoal. Amoonguss is healthy, and with the offensive output of Torkoal severely hampered, it can sit around for a long time to heal up Garchomp if needed. Joe just really does not have the offensive damage to finish off Garchomp here. He encores Amoonguss into Spore, but again, the game is sealed. Following turn, Jumpluff lands a Leaf Storm, dealing only around 10%, while Garchomp wakes up to finish off Jumpluff. Joe concedes the following turn, knowing Garchomp will finish off Torkoal, netting Joe second place at this tournament and giving Andrew his first regional win. This set demonstrated a few things perfectly. In both games 1 and 2, it showcased the impact hard reads have on the game. With Andrew being able to snowball his advantage game 1 off his early read, he failed his read game 2, which sealed his loss right away. Even with the lead Andrew had on game 1, Joe played to his outs quite well and was able to put up a good fight. Game 3, we saw Andrew dynamically change his win con multiple times and adjust his game plan to the circumstances of the match. Both players made choices that covered a variety of options when possible. Throughout this set, we didn't see a single miss, and only one critical hit that didn't impact any damage rolls thanks to Sneasler having a Focus Sash. This match showed a fine display of both of these players' skills. Lastly, we were able to see both players adjust their leads and which Pokemon they brought from game to game, really showing these games as part of a whole set. If there's any best of 3 game set you want analyzed next, leave it in the comments below. Thanks for watching.